Between 1942 and 1945, American military planes vanished in the Pacific at a rate that quietly alarmed U.S. commanders. Losses were expected in wartime, but what troubled investigators was where and how these disappearances were happening. Again and again, reports pointed to the same remote region, the same flight corridors, the same destination near a heavily forested island surrounded by unpredictable seas. At first, each incident was filed as routine. A bomber fails to return fuel exhaustion. A fighter disappears, likely mechanical failure. War was brutal, and paperwork moved fast. But as the months passed, patterns emerged that could no longer be ignored. Aircraft were not just being lost. In combat, they were disappearing without a fight. No enemy claims, no distress signals, no debris fields. Entire crews vanished as if erased from the sky. Pilots who survived missions near the island began talking among themselves, quietly, off record. They described something strange: storms that appeared without warning, clouds that swallowed aircraft whole, instruments that stopped making sense. Some said it felt like flying into a wall that couldn't be seen. The island itself was rarely mentioned by name in official briefings. On maps, it looked ordinary, just another jungle-covered landmass in a war filled with far more dangerous places. But among aircrews, it earned a reputation. Flights near it carried an unspoken tension. Veterans warned rookies to stay alert, to trust their instincts, to get out fast if conditions changed. Families back home received telegrams that said only two words: missing in action. No explanation followed. Behind the scenes, intelligence officers began reviewing flight logs. They noticed something unsettling. Aircraft didn't scatter randomly across the Pacific. They clustered around this one area. Missions entering the zone had a higher failure rate than missions flying through enemy-controlled skies elsewhere. The island wasn't defended by massive guns. It didn't scramble fighters. It didn't fire a single shot. Yet it killed just the same. And as the war escalated, the U.S. kept sending planes through the same skies because it had no choice. This was the beginning of a mystery that would remain unanswered for decades. A mystery not caused by enemy action, sabotage, or betrayal, but by something far more difficult to fight: the environment itself. And this island would soon earn a silent reputation as one of the deadliest places American pilots ever flew. When the United States entered World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor, it stepped into a theater of war unlike anything it had ever faced. The Pacific was not just vast, it was deceptive. Endless stretches of open ocean gave the illusion of simplicity. But for pilots, it was a maze with no walls and no clear paths. In Europe, air warfare followed relatively familiar patterns. Airfields were close together. Landmarks were visible. Weather systems, while dangerous, were somewhat predictable. The Pacific erased those advantages. Here, a single mission could mean flying for hours without seeing land. Navigation depended on compasses, stopwatch calculations, and the hope that clouds would clear at the right moment. American aircraft were pushed to their limits. Bombers like the B-24 Liberator and B-25 Mitchell were asked to operate at extreme ranges. Fighters such as the P-38 Lightning flew long escort missions over water, where a single engine failure meant certain death. There were no emergency landing strips in the ocean, no second chances. The island-hopping strategy made things even more dangerous. Each captured island became a temporary base for the next leap forward. Many of these islands were poorly surveyed, their terrain barely understood. Maps were often outdated, drawn from pre-war civilian charts or guesswork. Elevation lines were wrong. Mountain ranges were underestimated. Coastlines were misleading. Pilots were briefed with limited information. Weather forecasts were unreliable, sometimes based on observations made hundreds of miles away. Sudden storms were common, especially near mountainous islands that created their own violent weather systems. Clouds could form within minutes, trapping aircraft in whiteout conditions with nowhere to go. Despite these dangers, the pressure to fly never eased. Supplies had to move. Reconnaissance had to be done. Bombing missions could not wait. Crews were told that losses were part of war and that hesitation could cost lives elsewhere. As operations intensified, one region stood out: flights passing near a particular island reported more turbulence, more navigational confusion, and more close calls than anywhere else. Pilots returned shaken, describing flights that felt wrong from the moment they entered the airspace. Commanders took note, but there was no alternative route that didn't add hours of flight time and fuel risk. The missions continued. The Pacific War demanded speed. It demanded endurance. And it demanded that men fly into skies they did not fully understand. Soon, those skies would begin taking planes one after another, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions. The first aircraft failed to return on an otherwise unremarkable mission. It was not a major bombing run. There was no fierce dogfight reported, just a routine flight across a familiar route near the island. When the plane didn't arrive at its destination, commanders assumed the usual explanations: fuel miscalculation, mechanical trouble, or navigation error. Search planes were dispatched almost immediately. They found nothing. No floating debris, no oil slicks, no smoke rising from the jungle. The ocean was empty, and the island revealed nothing. Within weeks, another aircraft vanished along nearly the same route. This time, the concern deepened. The flight had been experienced. The weather report showed no major storms. There was no reason the plane shouldn't have returned. Then another went missing, and then another. By mid-1943, the disappearances had become impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Entire crews, sometimes 10 men at a time, were gone without a trace. The incidents spanned different aircraft types and mission profiles, yet shared one disturbing similarity: silence. No distress calls were logged. No emergency codes were transmitted. No final words. For pilots, that was terrifying. Even in combat, crews usually had time to report being hit, to send a mayday, to leave something behind. Here, the sky itself seemed to cut them off without warning. Intelligence officers began plotting the losses on maps. When they stepped back, the pattern became clear. The dots clustered around a narrow zone near the island far more densely than anywhere else in the Pacific. Informally, crews began talking, not in official reports, but in barracks and mess halls. Veterans warned new pilots to be cautious when flying that route. Some requested alternate paths, even if it meant burning more fuel or flying longer hours. Commanders listened, but options were limited. The war required constant movement. Supply lines couldn't bend around every dangerous area. Flights continued, and so did the losses. Each disappearance added weight to the mystery. Each missing plane left families waiting for answers that never came. Telegrams arrived with careful language. Missing in action, presumed lost. But among those tracking the data, a grim realization was forming. These planes weren't simply being lost. They were being taken, and whatever was responsible wasn't leaving a trace. Not every flight near the island ended in silence. In rare and unsettling cases, radio operators logged brief transmissions, fragments of conversations that hinted at sudden danger. These final words, preserved in mission reports and signal logs, would later become some of the most haunting evidence of what pilots faced in that region. One crew reported clear skies moments before entering the zone. Minutes later, their tone changed. Clouds had formed rapidly, rising from below and closing in from all directions. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The horizon vanished. Sea and sky blended into a single gray void. Another pilot reported violent turbulence without warning. His aircraft was being forced upward, then slammed downward as if caught in the grip of something invisible. Instruments began behaving erratically. Compasses no longer pointed consistently. Altimeters fluctuated wildly, making it impossible to judge altitude. Radio interference followed. Static overwhelmed transmissions. Voices broke apart mid-sentence. Operators on the ground struggled to understand what was being said. Then the signal cut off entirely. Surviving pilots who flew near the island later described the same sensation. A sudden loss of control paired with overwhelming confusion. Some said it felt like the aircraft was no longer responding normally, even though engines were running smoothly. Others spoke of spatial disorientation so severe they could no longer tell which way was up. In the Pacific, losing orientation was often fatal. Without visual reference, pilots could unknowingly fly straight into the sea or into terrain hidden by clouds. Near the island, towering mountains rose sharply from sea level, their peaks concealed. Until it was too late, these final transmissions created a chilling picture. The aircraft weren't slowly failing. They weren't limping home damaged. Something abrupt was happening, something that gave crews only moments to react. As reports accumulated, a disturbing consistency emerged. Different crews, different aircraft, different days, yet the same sequence. Clear conditions, sudden weather changes, instrument confusion, silence. Pilots began to fear not just the mission, but the airspace itself. Some described it as flying into a trap that could not be seen from the outside. By the time commanders began to fully understand the danger, many of the men who had flown those routes were already gone, and the question grew impossible to ignore. What kind of place could silence trained aircrews so completely? Pilots who survived flights near the island struggled to describe what they experienced. But one explanation kept surfacing again and again. The weather there behaved differently. It was unpredictable, aggressive, and often appeared without warning. What seemed like clear skies could transform into chaos within minutes. Meteorologists later studying the region discovered that the island's geography played a critical role. Steep volcanic mountains rose sharply from the ocean, forcing warm, moisture-heavy air upward at high speed. When this air collided with cooler upper layers, clouds formed rapidly and violently. Storm systems could appear almost instantly, with no gradual build-up detectable by the basic forecasting tools of the 1940s. For pilots relying on visual navigation, this was deadly. Low clouds would wrap around the mountains like a wall, hiding ridgelines and peaks. Strong updrafts and downdrafts formed along the slopes, capable of throwing aircraft off course or pushing them dangerously close to the terrain. In some cases, pilots unknowingly flew straight into mountain faces concealed by fog. Even more dangerous were the sudden wind shifts. Aircraft approaching for landing or flying low over the island encountered powerful crosswinds that could flip or stall a plane in seconds. Engines might be functioning perfectly, but the air itself had become an enemy. Then there were the waters below. Warm ocean currents collided near the island, feeding moisture into the atmosphere and amplifying storm intensity. Rain could become so dense that pilots described it as flying through a solid wall. Visibility dropped to zero. Instruments were the only guide, and even those could be misleading. The island earned a grim reputation among air crews. Some pilots quietly referred to it as a place that swallowed planes. Others believed the airspace was cursed. In reality, it was a perfect storm of geography, weather, and wartime urgency. Flights continued anyway. The war did not allow for hesitation. Supplies had to move, reconnaissance had to be completed, and every mission carried the unspoken risk that the crew might never return. As losses mounted, commanders faced an uncomfortable truth. This wasn't enemy fire causing the disappearances. It wasn't mechanical failure. It was something far more difficult to fight. Nature itself had become the island's greatest weapon. Yet weather alone could not explain every disappearance. Some planes vanished without any reported storm activity at all. And that raised an even more troubling possibility. During World War II, pilots crossing the Pacific relied on navigation methods that left little room for error. Celestial navigation, dead reckoning, paper maps, and magnetic compasses were the primary tools guiding aircraft. Across thousands of miles of open ocean, near the mysterious island, those tools began to fail in subtle but dangerous ways. Many pilots reported compass readings that refused to stabilize. Needles drifted, spun, or pointed inconsistently, especially when flying close to the island's rugged terrain. At the time, few aircrews understood how volcanic rock could distort local magnetic fields. The island sat on a geologically active foundation, rich in iron and other minerals capable of interfering with compasses. Even small deviations mattered. A slight heading error over land could be corrected visually. Over the Pacific, a few degrees off course could send an aircraft hundreds of miles away from safety. Once fuel began to run low, options vanished quickly. Radio navigation offered limited help. Signals bounced unpredictably off mountains and cloud layers. In heavy weather, communication ranges shrank dramatically. Pilots sometimes believed they were flying toward a beacon, when in reality, the signal had been reflected or distorted. Fatigue compounded the problem. Crews flew long missions under constant pressure, often at night. Often after minimal rest, decision-making slowed, spatial awareness declined. When weather closed in and instruments disagreed, even experienced pilots could become disoriented. In several documented cases, planes ran out of fuel while still airborne, lost not because they were damaged, but because their crews could no longer determine where they were. Rescue attempts faced the same obstacles. Search aircraft entering the region encountered identical conditions: poor visibility, unpredictable winds, and unreliable navigation made coordinated search patterns nearly impossible. Planes searching for the lost risked becoming lost themselves. The Pacific offered no forgiveness. Once an aircraft went down, whether into the ocean or into the mountains, the chances of recovery were slim. Dense jungles swallowed wreckage. Deep waters erased all trace. Families back home were left with nothing but unanswered questions. As the war continued, the disappearances near the island were quietly accepted as a tragic cost of operations. Reports were filed, coordinates were estimated, and the mystery faded into classified archives. But decades later, researchers would return to those records and notice something unsettling. Some flight paths should not have ended where they did, and that suggested that something more than simple navigation error might be involved. When the war ended, thousands of mission files were archived, sealed, or quietly forgotten. Among them were reports connected to aircraft losses near the mysterious island. Documents that raised questions no one seemed eager to answer publicly. In official summaries, many disappearances were attributed to weather-related incidents or presumed navigational error. These explanations were technically accurate, yet incomplete. Internal communications painted a more complicated picture. Some after-action reports noted inconsistencies between reported weather conditions and actual loss locations. Others mentioned unexplained radio failures occurring simultaneously across multiple aircraft. A few flagged unusual compass behavior as persistent but unconfirmed. These details rarely appeared in public casualty notifications. The U.S. military had strong reasons to keep the narrative simple, acknowledging that a vital route was inherently dangerous. Even without enemy interference could damage morale and slow operations. Admitting technological limitations might also expose vulnerabilities. So the files were classified. In certain cases, wreckage was never recovered. But lost locations were marked with confidence that did not match the available evidence. Coordinates were sometimes estimated, not confirmed. Rescue logs ended abruptly. Families received carefully worded letters stating their loved ones were missing in action or lost during operational flight. No mention was made of the island's reputation. No warning was given to future crews. Decades later, historians comparing declassified documents noticed something unsettling. The same phrases appeared again and again. Sudden loss of contact. Weather deteriorated unexpectedly. Navigation unreliable. The pattern was unmistakable. Yet no single report explained everything. Some aircraft vanished in clear conditions. Others disappeared far from the island itself. A few sent distress signals that were never fully investigated. The truth seemed scattered across hundreds of files, none of them telling the full story on their own. And that raised an uncomfortable question. What if the mystery wasn't ignored because it was unsolvable? What if it was set aside because it was inconvenient? In the decades after World War II, the mysterious island faded from public memory, but not from the minds of historians, aviation experts, and families searching for answers. As records were declassified and technology advanced, a new generation began piecing together what wartime crews never could. Satellite mapping revealed the island's true geography in astonishing detail. What once appeared as a single landmass on wartime charts was, in reality, a maze of razor-sharp ridges, hidden valleys, and sudden elevation changes. Many of the estimated crash coordinates from the 1940s were now known to be dangerously inaccurate. Underwater sonar surveys changed the picture even further. The ocean surrounding the island plunged rapidly into extreme depths. Aircraft that went down just miles offshore could sink thousands of feet in minutes, far beyond the reach of wartime recovery efforts. This explained why so many wrecks were never found. Meteorologists revisited old weather logs using modern models. They confirmed that the region was capable of generating sudden microbursts, violent downdrafts, and localized storms that would have been nearly impossible to predict with 1940s technology. Pilots hadn't exaggerated. The weather really did form out of nowhere. Aviation psychologists added another layer: spatial disorientation, especially over water and in low visibility, was now recognized as a leading cause of fatal accidents. The human brain, deprived of visual reference, could betray even the most experienced pilot. Still, not every case fit neatly into these explanations. Some aircraft vanished without distress calls. Others disappeared along routes that avoided the worst terrain. In a few instances, fuel calculations suggested the planes should have remained airborne long enough to reach safety. Those cases remain unresolved. Expeditions continue today, led by researchers using drones, magnetometers, and deep-sea imaging. Occasionally, fragments are found: twisted metal hidden beneath jungle growth or sonar echoes, hinting at wreckage below the waves. Each discovery brings closure to one family, but raises new questions about others. The mystery has become less supernatural, yet no less haunting, because even with all our technology, some answers are still lost, buried under jungle canopies and deep Pacific waters. And that leads to the final truth. The story of the mysterious island is not just about lost planes. It is about the limits of human knowledge, the cost of war, and the men who vanished without witnesses. For every aircraft that disappeared, there were families who waited, hoping for news that never came. These pilots were not careless. They were trained, disciplined, and experienced. Many had survived combat, enemy fire, and long missions over hostile territory. Yet here, without a single shot fired, they were lost to forces they could not see or fully understand. Their disappearances forced changes that still shape aviation today. The dangers revealed by this region influenced improvements in weather, forecasting, navigation systems, and pilot training. Modern aircraft are equipped with technologies specifically designed to prevent the kind of spatial disorientation and navigational confusion that proved deadly during the war. The mystery also reminds us how history is often simplified. Official explanations close cases quickly, but reality is rarely so clean. Hidden within archives are stories that challenge easy answers, stories that require time, technology, and courage to uncover. For historians, the island is a case study in how environment, technology, and human decision-making intersect. For families, it is a place of unresolved grief, and for the world, it is a reminder that even the most powerful military in history was vulnerable to the unknown. The planes that vanished did not disappear without meaning. They revealed truths we did not yet know how to see. And as long as some wrecks remain unfound, and some questions remain unanswered, the island's silence continues to speak. Because history is not only written by victories and battles, but by the mysteries we are still trying to understand.